Hello, this is Orlando Mayor Buddy Dyer.
Welcome home.
Soar into tower. We are ready for takeoff.
Por favor, manténganse alejado de las puertas.
Hey, it's Amy from DVC Clubhouse.
Hey Clubbers, it's Scott from DVC Clubhouse.
Hey, it's Kathleen from DVC Clubhouse.
Welcome aboard. It's Phil from DVC Clubhouse.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Debrief podcast brought to you by DVC Clubhouse. This is Amy, and I'm joined today by Phil and a special guest from the DVC Clubhouse Facebook group. We're joined here today by Shaun. Hey, Shaun.
Hello Clubbers, how we doing today?
So Shaun was nice enough to come in and be a guest today.
Wait
As we
a minute.
speak-
You missed my welcome aboard. Now you may go.
Oh, see, I'm all thrown off. Kathleen and Scott are in here. Shaun is here. Everything is thrown off. Kathleen and Scott are, as we speak, they're in a car driving from Florida to Ohio to go home for Easter.
Camp Fitch.
That's
That's all he's talked about for 4 episodes. He's got to be going to Camp Fitch for the holiday.
And so Shaun has agreed to come and be our guest today. So thank you, Shaun, for coming and joining us for a conversation that I know Phil has a lot to say about.
I'm looking forward to this one.
When we talked to Shaun about being a guest on the podcast, we asked him what he would like to talk about. Shaun, why don't you let our listeners know how you responded to that question?
Well, lately, obviously, with the wilderness cabins coming online, there's been a ton of chatter and talk on the Clubhouse Facebook pages about whether moderates should be allowed in. Is it a moderate? Why should moderates not be allowed in? And Phil, especially, has made it very well known. He's in the camp of never ever moderates. Die on that hill. And I just thought it would be interesting to maybe talk about maybe why would moderates be allowed in? Why shouldn't they be allowed in? What could we add to maybe some of these moderates to make them able to live up to a level of what a DVC resort should have? And also, are there any current DVC resorts that are in name DVC deluxe, but are moderates? And I think we know what we're talking about when we say that. And there are, spoiler alert. That was just my thought on it. And I thought maybe hash through some of this and get a little bit of a intelligent conversation going on the topic.
Well, there's your first problem. You thought we were going to have an intelligent conversation. We're at episode 26, and this would be the first time that happened.
Okay, I'll swap out for entertaining then. How's that?
I'm not going to lie. I'm actually very curious to hear what your arguments are for bringing a moderate category into DVC. We were joking about it before we hit the record button. Despite my salty demeanor, I actually encourage conversation and discourse. I think that that's how we learn. Amy and I have had a lot of these conversations off to the side, that though I tend to be very vocal on the page, a lot of that is just entertaining and really stoking conversation. But I am really looking forward to hearing what you have to say, because it sounds like you've given it a lot of thought and why you think the moderate category should or could be included in DVC. So it doesn't mean I'm not going to try my best to shoot down every point you make, but I am curious to hear what you've got to say.
Well, that's the beauty. For me, that's the beauty of DVC, is we're such a large, it's a clubhouse, such a large group of differing opinions. And I think we could be seen as the whole of the Disney community in a small little section here. But there's many different reasons. And this was one of my things I was going to talk about here is, why do we buy into DVC? What is now everyone's going to have 5 or 6 things as we all probably do, but what was your initial reasons why you purchased in the DVC? And that's going to be different for everyone. And that's going to dictate a lot of the whole moderate discussion, is basically what your viewpoints are on what DVC is.
Well, I don't think I've ever heard your origin story, frankly. I mean, we've had some back and forth on the page, but I think, Amy, were you about to ask a question?
You go ahead.
No, I was just simply going to say I don't know what your history and background are for why you bought in. I don't even know where you own. So I'd be curious to hear why you bought, where you bought, and maybe that helps give a foundation to what your arguments are going to be later.
Absolutely, and it will. And for the first, I think I started going to Disney. My parents took us there. We didn't have a ton of money growing up, but we had enough to go to Disney. But it was kind of an every 3 year thing. The first trip I don't remember at all. I was probably 3, and we stayed at a Days Inn or some off property thing. The only thing I remember from that trip is my grandmother bought me a grape soda out of the vending machine at the hotel, and I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. But then the next trip, and probably about the next 7 trips after that, we stayed every time at one of the Port Orleans resorts, mostly French Quarter. That was our favorite. And when French Quarter wasn't available, then we would stay at Riverside. So obviously, when you stay at something as a child and you have a lot of great childhood memories, that is where your Disney soul sort of lies for me. We never had the money to stay at a deluxe resort. So I grew up on Port Orleans moderate resorts. That to me was Disney. So when I grew up and, was an adult and started taking my kids there, we had started going to French Quarter a few times, but then it's kind of expensive. It got more expensive as the years went on to go to Disney, and I wanted to go more, but I found I was really only able to, justify maybe every 2 years. So to me, deep down, the reason I bought into DVC was I wanted to have a guaranteed trip to Disney each year. And it wasn't about saving money, because I could have just kept going to the moderate resorts for probably the same reason, but my wife probably wouldn't have allowed that because it cost a ton. And when you think about an individual trip, it's a big difference when it comes to lodging. So in my mind, buying into DVC, you're already in the boat. It's not about getting in the boat, you're in the boat. And it's a mental thing. And that for me was honestly the big reason I bought into DVC, was that whether times were good or bad, I kind of had a guaranteed reason to go down to Disney every year, which turned out now into like, 5 times a year. It started with that, with the ulterior kind of motive of I was always curious about these deluxe resorts and I could never stay at them, and I never would be able to justify staying at them for, $900 a night. So DVC, that was my secondary motive for DVC, was the deluxe accommodations. So that kind of frames my DVC thoughts. We had originally purchased a resale from Boulder Ridge for 150 points. That quickly I realized wasn't going to be enough, because the more you go to Disney, the more you want to go to Disney. So then I wanted to get the blue card. So we bought 100 points at Animal Kingdom. I think it's Kidani, which I'm ashamed of because I've actually Jumbo so much better, but it doesn't matter in the end. But I always kind of get irked by that when I see it on my dashboard. But so after Animal Kingdom, God, what was next?
So you said you bought 100 at Kidani, so now you're up to 250.
So we were at 250.
Okay.
So then we ended up buying into Grand Floridian, which I had promised my wife, Jennifer, I would never ask to buy any more DVC points. So I had to find a reason for her to suggest it. And she really liked Grand Floridian. So I mentioned how low the pricing was for the direct points when they first came out. And then she was the one that actually said, maybe we should buy it. And I was like, perfect, plan worked.
So when you promised, was it a regular promise or a pinky promise? Because in
It
our
was like
house,
she made me, when we bought the 100 direct points at Animal Kingdom, she basically made me swear that I wouldn't ask for any more points. And
so we always say in our house, okay, well, you got a pinky promise. If you promise, they make you pinky promise.
It was
you
a total
break
pinky
a pinky promise.
Yeah, total pinky promise. So anyway, we bought, and I always get a lot of, crap for this, but we bought, she said, let's buy 50 points at Grand Floridian. So when I talked to my guide, he said 50 points. I said, let's make it 55. So, I was like, I'll squeak out that extra 5, which irks everyone who sees that. They say, "Why on earth do you have not a rounded number?" But I do. I have 55. So then we had our Animal Kingdom, Boulder Ridge, and Grand Floridian. Then I started realizing that I liked Boardwalk a lot. And we started talking about maybe we could get some boardwalk points, but she was really opposed to buying more points. So I concocted a whole scheme of selling off the Boulder Ridge contract and splitting that between a purchase of, it was originally supposed to equal out to 150 points, but then I ended up, I ended up getting 100 at Boardwalk and then 100 at Copper Creek. And
It
then
happens.
we ended up so we got those, and then our last couple contracts we got two 50-point contracts over the course of about a year at Hilton Head, because we're Maryland natives and we actually really like Hilton Head as well, and anyone who tries to book there in the summer knows that you pretty much have to own there. So now we have 455, and
I'm glad you said that
God,
because I lost track. I need a chart, an easel, a
yeah, I
spreadsheet, a
know
slide
it's
deck, a slide rule, an abacus.
Yeah, I really am tempted to get 45 somewhere just to make it that even 500, but
You and I are going to be friends.
yeah, I've held off so far, mainly because again my wife is like, "Oh my god, like we can't keep buying points." And it does kind of suck around January when you get those, especially with Hilton Head, you get those dues in and you're like, "Whoo, uh now I know why I'm not going to buy more points next year." But I could be pushed. I've told my wife, if they ever make a Port Orleans related DVC resort that includes rooms with balconies, I am 100% selling whatever I have to sell to buy a decent sized direct contract at whatever new property they build. And that is a given. I swear on that. Whatever I have to do, if I have to sell a kidney or a child or whatever, I am going to own there. But I I was a little tempted for the wilderness lodge or wilderness cabins, but ultimately didn't want to. I just felt it wasn't for us. So that's where we are.
What year did you buy your first contract?
So I actually didn't buy our first contract until January of, I think it got added to the books on January of 2020. So I have done all of this in the span of basically 3.25 years.
I love you. I'm just going to throw that out there. I love you.
For anybody who doesn't know, this is the first time that Phil and Shaun are like kind of meeting, if you can call this
Yeah.
meeting. I mean,
Yeah.
they've run into each other on Clubhouse and on the Facebook group, but this is the first time they're conversing. So
Aside from the whole moderate category, I really feel like we're soul brothers already. He's talking my level of OCD. You've got to make the even number, and it's Kadania, not Jumbo. I could maybe get 45 points to get it up to an even 500. So, for anyone that doesn't know, I'm the guy that when we adjust the volume, it has to be an even number or a multiple of 5. So it can be 0, 2, 4, 5, 6, 8. It can be no other uneven number. I eat all of my candies and cereal in order. If you've ever seen me eat a meal, I will turn the plate and eat the vegetables first. And then I have next level OCD. So the fact that he's willing to buy 45 points to get to 500 just endears him to me.
Yeah. Got to go that route.
well, I'm not that type of person, so
No.
Color me shocked.
yeah. I I could own 223 points and be perfectly fine with that. And I'm sure that probably makes you both twitch. Oh yeah, there you go. But I just wanted to go back to the point that you made before you went into your origin story about kind of the thing that speaks to any of us about how we got involved with DVC is kind of really will determine how we view DVC and what, the purpose DVC kind of fulfills in our lives. I mean, I think for everyone wants to be able to go back frequently. Everyone wants to be able to go back to Disney at least once a year, and DVC allows people to be able to do that. But that bit of kind of, and it's what we always talk about on the podcast is really like that intangible, and it's the feels, the thing that's different for everybody else. And that is what, we've talked about. I kind of, what did you call it, Phil, when I went on that long kind of, what did you call it, my monologue about
Oh,
Old
and you
Key
were offering a
West?
monologue, pontificating.
Yes, when I gave my monologue about Old Key West, when it, how like the origins of Disney Vacation Club, and that they introduced the new category deluxe villas when they introduced the Disney Vacation Club. And many people would argue that Old Key West is a moderate based on its location and the fact that it's sprawling and that there's an internal bus loop.
You offered a great segue because I think that Shaun mentioned it earlier. Regardless of how many times we talk about how you cannot have the moderate resort category in DVC, there is a substantial argument that DVC started with what could be arguably called a moderate resort. Outside facing doors, not inside. There are balconies, long bus route, bus ride to everywhere. It has a lot of the other hallmarks of what we consider to be a deluxe resort now, with good on site dining and a reasonable feature pool. But there are some aspects of that resort that much more closely align with the moderate category than they do with the deluxe category.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I got major, first time I went to Old Key West, I got major moderate vibes just by the campus being spread out the way it is. The bus loop, oh my God, the bus loop, that is moderate resort to a T. It's worse than almost all the other moderate resorts. So there's a lot of things when I went there that struck me as, well, this is really a moderate resort. Not talking about what I feel really is the rooms, which make it distinguishes a deluxe resort, is the balcony and obviously the suites. But in everything else, in every other regard, it really does feel to me like how a moderate resort felt when I was going all throughout my life.
I've argued that if you're going to call Coronado a moderate resort, now 1 and 2 and 3 bedrooms aside, if you are going to call Coronado a moderate resort, then you have to call Old Key West a moderate resort because I think Coronado has so much to offer as far as resort with the swimming pool, the theming, the restaurants, the lounges that are on site at Coronado. There's so much to offer there. The only thing it really lacks that Old Key West has is larger rooms. Other than that, they're very comparable as far as the amenities
And balconies.
and balconies. Sorry.
Yeah, and that to me is Coronado is really interesting because Coronado is Disney is starting to was kind of where Disney started really blurring the lines between a deluxe and a moderate. The Grand Destino Tower, and I stayed there a year ago for the first time. If you had balconies on that, that is 100% a deluxe building.
I
They have
100% agree.
some of the most incredible restaurants. The Three Bridges Bar and Grill is absolutely one of the best restaurants on Disney, in my opinion. I love that place. I love the atmosphere. The food is terrific. Toledo is very good. I wouldn't put it up there as, maybe my top three, but it's a very, very good resort. I'm sorry, dining establishment. The bars and the lounges are pretty good there. And it really, but then you have the traditional spread out moderate resort layout with the ranchos all the way in the back that are way far away from everything. It's a very interesting case because it's sort of a hybrid. I don't think it fits any of the traditional Disney resort categories.
It's a moderate resort with deluxe amenities, which is how I would also classify Old Key West.
Exactly.
I feel as though Coronado Springs, when they built that Grand Destino Tower, because, for anybody who is kind of newer on the Disney scene, when Coronado Springs was built, it was only the casitas and the ranchos. That building is much newer. And so it was your typical moderate resort. And it did not have all of those bars and amenities that you just mentioned, because those all came with the building of the Grand Destino Tower. Before that was built, the only they had one table service restaurant. It was Maya Grill. the only rooms that were available were in these, outlying buildings that you have to take an internal bus loop to. I think what Disney did with Coronado Springs was that they very much were trying to appeal to corporations and companies that were looking to bring conventions to Disney. There are convention centers that are at some of the deluxe resorts like Contemporary and Yacht Club and the Swan and Dolphin. But I would imagine that the price tag on those are much higher because of their location. And so they were able to build a convention facility that could accommodate a lot of hotel guests and provide the types of amenities that one would be looking for if they were on a business trip. Because convention goers are not going to be your average Disney World guest. The majority of them are going to be people who are traveling solo without, families, and they want to, after they have their day of meetings or whatever they're attending, they want to be able to go back to the resort and have a good meal and drink because they're on company time and without their kids and family. So they introduced this like very to what feels to me like a very business catered resort because the one thing that I feel and I know that I've been there. I think it's great. All of the amenities are wonderful. But for me, the one thing that I feel about the Grand Destino Tower is that it doesn't necessarily feel very Disney to me. It feels kind of like a hotel that you would find in like Las Vegas. Like it's like watered down Las Vegas. It's not
It's a Bay
quite.
Lake Tower with better amenities, basically.
I would go one step further. You said it feels like a hotel you could find anywhere else. Would you venture to say that it feels like a Marriott?
Yeah. I mean, I think that if you stepped outside of the Walt Disney World property and you go to that Marriott Crossroads, you're looking at something that's very similar right there. Or that the Gaylord Palms, those hotels are kind of have that vibe.
I think you hit the nail on the head, and I asked Marriott specifically. I said from minute one, if you look at the history of Disney, and it's a little slight aside here, go on a tangent. If you look at the history of Disney right from the Contemporary Hotel with that big convention center, then when they built Beach and Yacht Club, they turned Yacht Club into the convention hotel. Boardwalk was initially not slated to be a hotel. It was initially slated to be a boardwalk for the convention goers to visit from Yacht Club. When they built Grand Destino Tower and brought in all of those amenities, they were directly competing with Swan and Dolphin and the price point of Swan and Dolphin. Swan and Dolphin was pulling all of the big conventions. And if you look at where the conventions are, whether it's I've been down to a couple drug reps and medical conferences and business conferences, they all gravitate to Swan and Dolphin because their price point is far lower than Yacht Club right next door. I think Grand Destino in that feel that you're talking about was very intentional as a direct competitor to Swan and Dolphin.
So for me, I feel like, yeah, I mean, we're talking about what Coronado is and how it feels and stuff, but I think it lays out a blueprint for how Disney could introduce the DVC name to some of these moderate resorts because Coronado essentially has two pricing tiers. They've got your regular sort of the casitas and all that stuff, which is one price. And then you've got the secondary pricing, which the Grandestino Tower is easily $125, maybe more in some instances, a night more than that. It brings in some dining that is, you cannot argue that Coronado has a deluxe level of dining. It has better dining than a fair amount of deluxe properties in the DVC repertoire. I see Coronado as the blueprint for DVC. What basically and I said it before, what do you need to add to each specific resort to bring it up to a level that you would consider it a moderate resort, Old Key West included, and some of these other resorts that are thrown in there? I would argue that Riviera and Caribbean Beach are essentially a hybrid resort because they're right next to each other. You can easily walk from one to the other. You can easily use all the amenities at each of them. Well, maybe not the pool for the poor Caribbean people going to Riviera, but other than that, I mean, if you wanted to go eat at Topolino's, it's a quick walk from Caribbean. So when you look at it from that angle, I think the moderate category, I could see it maybe turning into, or I wouldn't be upset if it turned into sort of this hybrid dual pricing schemes where you essentially have deluxe level amenities with some cheaper accommodation options for people to stay there. And in that aspect, that's kind of my argument for why moderates could eventually be into a DVC, funneled into and with the wilderness cabins, it already is, but there's a way that it can happen where essentially you have a little bit of both for the deluxe and the moderate side, and everyone's happy. Now, whether that can be done effectively is still questionable, but I think there's a path for that to happen.
So I think that the biggest challenge that the moderate resorts have, and I've mentioned this on other episodes, it is not really about the dining or the pools because those are things that can easily be added. The issue is the room size
Yes, you're right.
because the average size, keeping Grand Destino Tower out of it for a minute, at all of the other moderate resorts, so Port Orleans, French Quarter, and Riverside, Caribbean Beach, and Coronado Springs in the casitas and the ranchos, those rooms are all 314 square feet.
Yes.
And the smallest DVC studios, I'm not talking the tower studios because those only accommodate two, but the smallest DVC deluxe studio that accommodates four people is 316 square feet, and that are the values at Animal Kingdom Lodge. So the room sizes at the moderate resorts are 2 square feet smaller than the value studio at Animal Kingdom Lodge. The Grand Destino Tower rooms, those are 375 square feet. And those are actually larger than every DVC deluxe studio except for Grand Californian, Old Key West, Riviera, Polynesian, Hilton Head, and the resort studios at Grand Floridian. So they are on the larger size, those rooms are. So one could argue that if they were going to start with some sort of moderate conversion, the only place that they could start without needing to really do some like serious knocking down and rebuilding would be at the Grand Destino Tower because you could still accommodate four people, maybe five, and still have a kitchen room for a kitchenette and a bathroom. The other rooms are fairly small. So we would be talking about, and perhaps this speaks to your point about having kind of, quote unquote, cheaper room options available. If they were to offer these rooms at a significantly lower price per point, then you would have some sort of, they'd need to maybe even introduce a new category of room that would have a much smaller kitchenette area, very similar to what they have in the resorts now, maybe like what they have in the resort studio at Grand Floridian, which is just like such a small, you can't even call it a kitchenette. It's like a little counter with a microwave and coffee maker. But for the other resorts, I think that that is the main challenge is, are you then taking two rooms to make one? And what are you doing with the exterior doors? And I think that it poses a logistical question in terms of, if you're using the existing buildings, how are you going to really convert those into units that are going to accommodate the number of people that need to be accommodated in a DVC unit? So what is your thinking?
My caveat is yes, you can't have a room like, let's say, my favorite French Quarter. You can't have a French Quarter room be a DVC property. It is not. It's a moderate resort room, and it's small, and it doesn't have a balcony, and it's never going to and never should be a DVC room. My argument for the moderate resorts becoming a DVC property would be sort of like, let's say, the Poly Tower, that they're putting in. Building a whole section that has a tower or some sort of larger like building that has DVC rooms, they have balconies, they have everything you'd consider DVC, and it is separate from the room, sort of almost exactly like the Grandestino Tower and the rest of the rooms at Coronado. You have two separate structures, basically two separate pricing structures on the same property. That would be my way of getting DVC into the moderate resorts, is making these hybrid style moderate resorts where you essentially have a moderate resort stitched up to a deluxe resort. You would have to have, in my opinion, you'd have to have a signature dining restaurant, which, in some of the resorts, Caribbean Beach already has a really pretty good restaurant. I love Sebastian's. I mean, it is a great restaurant. I wouldn't go so far for French Quarter. Is boat rights? I don't know, but God, you're begging if you put another building in to have a Tiana's restaurant at that resort. And that to me would easily make that resort, one of the higher end deluxe resorts, if you had a building that had sufficient room to have the building, the rooms that would be required for DVC. So I guess I'm sort of making that hybrid approach. Yes, I don't think they should just take a wing of these moderate resorts as they are and turn them into DVC. I would be completely against that because I do not think that would be worth it. But I do think that you could have sort of the hybrid model that would allow you a little more, leverage in placing some of these properties in the moderate resort category. So that's essentially my argument. It's sort of a little bit of both.
Well, I think you've made a couple of points here, and I'm going to preface this by offering my apologies to Chad and Matt and a couple of others. But number one, they've already done that. You've just described Riviera in a nutshell. It's got a signature meal in Topolino's. It's got inside doors. It's got balconies. But really, all they did was just add another tower to Coronado, give it a couple of amenities, and call it a deluxe resort and made it DVC. I think if Disney had their way, they would do that with every new build from now on. They have figured out that DVC is a cash cow. I think we're seeing it with the cabins. I've said it before and I will continue to say it. What they did was realize that the cabins needed to be rebuilt, and the easiest and most cost effective way to do that was to get DVC members to buy into points and subsidize their building of those cabins. There's no doubt in my mind that's what they did. I think that there is without a doubt a plan inside of DVD. And yes, I said DVD, people, for those that think I misspoke, DVD, to take anything they possibly can from this point forward and any new building in any location on property and turn it into a DVC property. It is, for a company that some would argue is cash strapped right now, the easiest way to generate funds to do that rebuild. And I think they're going to ride this bus until the wheels fall clean off of it. We could get into the logistical issues. I think there are more logistical issues than just the room size when it comes to introducing a new category and that many new members into the DVC world. I think maybe we underestimate the difficulties that we'll encounter, but there's no doubt in my mind that they've already done the hybrid model that you're speaking of.
And I'm not convinced that down the road we aren't going to see a resurrection of some form of reflections. So, because I think right now the challenge that Disney is having is land. At one point, they had a blank slate of land, but in order to keep resorts close to the parks and keep them somewhat desirable in terms of location, they're starting to have to build upwards, which is why they built Riviera and built it where they built it, because they were able to build up, and can get so many more hotel rooms when you're building up versus building these sprawling hotels, which is what the kind of like original model of some of these not even DVC hotels, but just Disney World hotels in general. None of them were very tall. I mean, contemporary, yes, but that was supposed to be this like futuristic building. The rest of the resorts that they started building were a bunch of buildings that were kind of spread out from one another, all of them, including Grand Floridian, which is, the deluxe of deluxe resorts. You have to walk outside to get to the main building from your room. And they've needed to start to build up. So They did it with Riviera, they did it with Grand Destino, and now they're doing it with the Poly.
Well, let's not forget about Bay Lake Tower, which is the essential of, I mean, that's basically a Marriott hotel. It has no theming or anything. It is basically an apartment building that was placed directly next to Contemporary, just because of its location. That's all it has going for it. Its location. That was one of the first ones. I mean, Riviera, yes, but they did that long, with Bay Lake Tower was the epitome of it.
I think it's more
Yeah.
of a Hyatt than a Marriott. It's got that
Yeah,
Hyatt look to
true.
it. If
All right.
if you
Yeah.
want to know where I think the next tower is going to be, I think the other garden wing is going to get knocked right down. That's showing its age. It's old. It's smelly. It's got low roofs. It's in need of repairs. I think you're going to see another tower at the end by the water bridge. You're going to see a south tower that matches the north tower. That's the obvious answer to me. As long as the ground there will support the building, which I think is probably the only question right there. I think that's the easy answer if they have the clearance to build there and it's not too swampy.
Well, Amy, you were completely right about the land issue, and Phil's bringing it up now. But and the whole reason this whole show idea got bought up is, like I've said, it's my love for French Quarter and my desire to have a deluxe. My dream in life is to have a balcony overlooking the Sassagoula River. That is my dream in life. Like I said, if they ever did that, I'd be over the moon. But there's no room. There's no room at that resort. And I've
What
looked
if
at the
they had
Google
DVC
Maps.
houseboats?
I'm not opposed. I've thought about writing Mr. Dirksen about possibly how much would you be opposed to lopping off a third of that golf course across the river, because that would be a great place to make some DVC towers that can be accessed by both those resorts. But you're right. I mean, that's really what's hemming them up, and that would be what might keep some of these moderates from getting anything, is there's just no room for it.
And I think that when we're dealing with something where theme is so, so roped into the nostalgia that people feel, I don't know that a tower lends itself to, Riverside. Maybe you could say a French Quarter because you're gonna be, because New Orleans is a city.
Just theme it after
Yeah.
Canal Street.
But yeah, but Riverside, I don't know that you can't really have a tower at Riverside
I would make the
and have
argument that
it
you can't
be.
have a yeah, you can't have a tower in how many Polynesian islands have a large, 15-story tower in it. That completely destroys the entire feel of the Polynesian resort.
That's why I've said if they don't name that thing the Waikiki Tower, then
Yeah,
I don't know what
yep,
they're gonna do, because that's
yeah,
the only place where you're gonna find tall buildings is in Honolulu and Waikiki. So
yep.
We've already discussed this. Scott and I have come to an agreement. We've trademarked the term. That is the Grand Polaridian.
I'll take it.
so I that is why, I think that with the conversion of the cabins at Fort Wilderness to moderate, this was and definitely to your point, Phil, and we've discussed it before, getting those cabins to be refreshed on DVC members' dime was definitely an attractive option for them. But it also was really the only moderate resort that they could arguably convert those units and have enough space to accommodate. And we're looking at 6 people. So you can accommodate 6 people in the cabin where no other moderate resort could accommodate 6 people. So I do think that they did kind of slide that in there because it's the only place where they really could realistically, as little effort as possible, convert a moderate to a DVC resort. And then to your point about this hybrid model, they do have the space over there to build something eventually one day. Because if we're saying that, well, let me ask you this question. If they hadn't converted the cabins to a moderate, if they had gone along as planned with Reflections as a DVC resort, would you have considered that to have been a moderate resort, or would you have considered it to be a deluxe resort?
I would say it depends on what was in Reflections. if you had signature dining or even just a good sit down and maybe a good bar and you had the balconies, I would be willing to say yes. And I'm going to go so far as to say that Fort Wilderness was not a moderate. Fort Wilderness is a value resort because people are paying, $50 a night to sleep in a tent. And essentially, you have to walk a mile if you don't want to spend the money to get a golf cart. It really, to me, yes, they always said the cabins were moderates, but I always thought of it as a value resort. So I think DVC went even further than the moderate, and they put a DVC resort, a deluxe resort, on a value property, in my opinion.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I have this recollection many years back of those cabins being classified as deluxe at one point. Am I incorrect?
No, you are correct.
I thought so.
And I, in fact, when this whole conversation around the cabins started, I haven't really paid attention to the cabins, so I didn't know that they shifted from deluxe to moderate. And when this whole conversation sprung up and people started saying, "Well, it's a moderate resort," I went and I checked because I remember that they were at one time considered a deluxe resort.
I was just saying that, that also goes along with, it's all this hybrid thing where you can call a room or a segment of rooms whatever you want to call them, and Disney can do that because it's their property and they can name it what they want and they can charge you for whatever. But in reality, when you have to look at the entire package of a resort, I believe, to really say, what is that resort? Because they can say whatever they want. I mean, like I said, there's a guy in a tent sleeping next to you, and you're in this cabin, or adjacent maybe, and that guy's spending $45 a night or whatever it is, and he's out there cooking cans of beans and hot dogs, and you're trying to enjoy your deluxe resort property. To me, that's one of the reasons. It's one of the reasons I didn't buy is it just is not, to me, it's just not DVC. And I understand Phil's exactly right as why they did it. They didn't do it in the true sense of a DVC. They did it as a way to get around some unpleasant financial situations they're having. So, for me, I find it interesting with the naming of these categories because they can just put whatever they want on each. It doesn't mean it is.
I swear we're the same person. This sounds exactly like the conversations we've had offline as well. I think Amy and I have had this argument as well. And I go back to, if you look at DVC's marketing, probably circa 2013 to 16, because that's when we started looking at it. All of their marketing was stay deluxe for 50% of the price. And they were true deluxes at that point, with a couple of notable issues, such as Old Key West, which we've discussed. And we've noticed that their marketing has changed. You see now deluxe resort villas, and Amy keeps making this point that they're not deluxe resorts, they're deluxe resort villas. And I think that that's a very strategic move on Disney's part to move away from that. We are not the same as a deluxe resort. We're a deluxe resort villa. And then they started pulling the deluxe kind of out of it, except for the extra magic hours and all the little benefits that you get. And I think that by allowing that to happen, we're really co-signing Disney turning these into something that I don't think a lot of us foresaw when we bought in. So I can say that we also, as a kid, we stayed off property. My first trip there was to the Travel Lodge. We stayed at the Sheraton Vistana. We stayed at Wilson World. I don't know if anybody remembers Wilson World. Their big claim to fame was that they played the radio and music underwater in the pool. As a kid, we thought that was just the coolest thing
Wow.
ever. Yeah, it was great. But I think that leads to my next concern. And I think by talking about the hybrid properties, it actually takes a little wind out of my sails here, because some of my arguments have been, and we mentioned it at the beginning of the episode, what does your price point become if you truly call it a moderate DVC property? If your price per point is 125 a point or 150 a point versus 225 to 250 a point, now you have people that are able to buy many more points for lower dollars. Okay, now how does that translate into getting amenities at Polynesian or at Grand Floridian? Now they're in for a far less dollar per point with the same number of points. Do they still have availability at the 7-month booking window? They paid far less for their property than everything else is going for now. And I get you could make the argument that way back in the day, Old Key West was $70 a point, but DVC properties are selling well over $200 a point now direct. If you sell a moderate property at 2/3 of that price, what does that do to the demand for the deluxe properties? Now you get into, I'm sorry, Amy, were you going to answer that one? You leaned in.
I was gonna say, I think that the way DVC, they kind of drew the line in the sand with that, with what they are selling, first Riviera and now the cabins. They are selling them at the same price per point as the other deluxe resorts.
They're calling them deluxe. The point I was making is if you called it moderate, if you truly introduced a moderate category of
But
DVC.
I don't think they ever would do that. That's thing, that's the Disney trickery, and that's like like I said, the hybrid thing. I think they would try and find some way to say that, oh, this is actually a deluxe resort and we're going to charge you $220 a point or $25 a point to buy here. I don't think they're
It's
going to shoot
literally what they're
themselves.
doing.
Yeah,
It's
Right,
that
but
literally what
literally
they're
is what
doing
they're
right now
doing.
at the
So,
cabins.
but
so
that
I'm not
speaks to
worried
my
about
first.
it.
And the way that they get around it is that they are just having resorts that have more affordable points charts. So you're spending the same amount per point, but you are going to get to use more points.
And I guarantee the guides are, yeah, I guarantee the guides who are, and a lot of these people coming in, buying new into these cabins who maybe have stayed there in the past and want to go in, they're talking to a guide and the guide is selling them not on a point value that is what they're going to realistically need to stay the amount of time they want. They're selling them on the 150, 200, 250 point contracts with by saying, hey, you're going to be able to use these at these other resorts as well. So they're shelling out a ton of money on I would imagine most people buying here who are not already DVC veterans are shelling out a ton of money to buy, equivalent to what they could do to buy at the Grand Floridian or even the Poly Tower that's coming out.
I think that goes back, number one, to my first point of we have allowed them to shift the expectations by moving away from what I believe are true Disney deluxe resorts to other types of resorts, your quote unquote mod adjacents, your formerly moderate but now a deluxe. We have allowed them to move that needle for what our expectations are. And that's what's giving them the entree to put these towers, if they were to do it, into these moderate resorts and still call it deluxe. My concern is if they were to continue to do this, the true deluxes are going to remain the true deluxes. Your Grand Floridians, your beach clubs, your Polynesians. There is going to be a greater demand for those resorts. The people that are buying into these new resorts, which arguably, and I know, yes, Matt and Chad, you're screaming at me through the radio, that these resorts that arguably aren't the same as the original deluxes at the 7-month window are going to become harder and harder to get. That is not going to go in the other direction. I don't see the same number of Boardwalk and Beach Club and Polynesian and Grand Floridian desperately trying to get into the cabins or desperately trying to get into a Port Orleans or a Coronado unless the points charts are just so amazingly attractive that you can stay huge periods of time in a small room. I think what we're going to see is a flooding of points into DVC and a higher competition for those high demand units at 7 months and much less competition for the others. It's going to be the resort of last resorts, as Scott would say.
Let me ask real quick, Phil, what for let's say for a Port Orleans, what would be required, what would they have to put in there to make that resort up to your level of what you would require a DVC, where you'd feel comfortable and say, wow, I'd really like to stay at that resort as well?
I think they're two different questions.
Hold on. I
Go
want
ahead.
to I want to hear that answer, but I want to address something that you said, and then we can move on to what we would need to do to the moderates. I just want to address that I think, when you talk about we've allowed them to shift the expectation, I do think that there are two different segments of DVC members that exist. There are people like me who bought in 2002. And so my expectations are very different than people who bought in 2019. or even people who bought in 2015, when they started opening all of these DVC resorts on the monorail, my expectations are different. So I feel as though my threshold for tolerance of something like the cabins, to me, it just feels like great. They're expanding the portfolio of resorts. So I have a greater diversity of places to stay because when I bought Beach Club, there were already existing, only three already existing resorts. They were Old Key West, Boardwalk, and Boulder Ridge. And so they kind of were like this very diverse group of resorts that were in the DVC portfolio. And so I do think that there's a large segment of DVC owners that don't feel like it's so egregious to be having resorts that would be considered moderate because of their location. To me, and I've said this about Riviera so many times, the thing to me that is the most egregious about Riviera is their points chart. Because why should I have to be paying as many or more points to stay at Riviera than I would stay at Beach Club? Just makes zero sense. And so that to me is really, it comes down to a points chart issue. And that for me is like, as long as the points chart is reflective of the location and the amenities, then I'm okay with it because that is for the length of my membership. That has been what I have lived through. Old Key West was always lower than Beach Club because of its location. And then when they started building these resorts on the monorail, those were higher because of their location. So I'm okay with a resort being located anywhere as long as I'm not being expected to shell out the same number of points for a, quote unquote moderate DVC resort as I would be for a like the most premium deluxe. And then I think that, that brings us to then what would need to happen at those other at the moderate resorts to warrant a or to qualify as something that would fit in with the DVC portfolio of resorts.
Interestingly enough, almost everything you just said there is mostly what I was going to reply back to Shaun as far as what would need to happen to turn Port Orleans into a deluxe or a DVC. But there was a second part of that question to me, which is something that I would be comfortable at. And I think you mirrored exactly what I was going to say. I think Port Orleans, you could argue that it's too far away, but it's right between Saratoga and Old Key West. There's no big difference between those three. So you can't really argue the location. If you're willing to stay at Old Key West and Saratoga, you need to be willing to stay at Port Orleans. It's just one little tributary off the exact same river where the boats run together to get to Disney Springs. I think you need to bring in some dining. I like Boat Rights. I think it's an okay restaurant. I think they've got Yeehaw Bob that drags people in, but I don't think they truly have a signature sit down that your deluxe resorts would have.
It's equal in my mind to an Olivia's or to a surf club, and maybe even to, I mean, I know that this is going to annoy you, but I just like, I don't think that there's any dining at Polynesian that is like truly signature.
I don't disagree. I think there used to
Yeah.
be. I think that this is another instance where people have just the furor around Ohana became so big and Ohana became so difficult to get to, and everybody wanted the reservation and the meal plans came in. I don't think Ohana is a shadow of what it used to be. I think I've said before that when given the choice, we actually go to Kona now. And even Kona, the last 3 or 4 years, their portion sizes have gone down, their menu has been shrinking. I don't disagree at all. Even when we've spoken about this, about our trip around the monorail, I'm going elsewhere for meals when given the choice. So that doesn't upset me at all. I completely agree 100%. But I think you do need to bring in some sit down that I think is of a higher quality than Boat Rights. For as much as I think it's an adequate meal, it's a fun place to go. I don't think you're going to draw the crowds, and I don't think it speaks to what a deluxe resorts restaurant should be. I think that obviously you need to do something with the rooms. All the deluxe, even your non DVC deluxe rooms are much bigger than what's there. So you do have a room size issue. I personally don't have a problem with the outward facing doors. I do think it gives a motel vibe. But again, let's look at the resorts that it's right next door to in the outward facing doors. How can you possibly say that that's unacceptable when the two resorts that are right next to it have the exact same accommodations, the exact same outward opening doors? For me to purchase there, Amy made the point perfectly for me. I think the problem you run into for where you need to price that location is that Old Key West is already ridiculously low point wise. Boardwalk is ridiculously low point wise. Even Beach Club, if you look at it in the grand scheme of things, is nowhere near where the new points charts are. I could not agree with Amy more. I don't have a personal issue with Riviera. It's just not my style. And I brought my wife there a couple of trips ago. We were there without the kids to run wine and dine. And I said, let's hop on the Skyliner and head over to Riviera. She didn't really know where I stood on Riviera. We don't discuss it, we don't speak about it. So we hopped on the Skyliner, we went over, we grabbed a coffee, we hung in the lobby for 45 minutes. And I said, what do you think about it? And she went, eh, which is exactly how I feel about Riviera. It's just eh. And the points charts are absolutely 100,000% egregious for what you get from that. I won't apologize about that to anybody. I don't think their pool is that amazing. I think that their bar is okay. I think Topolino's is a good meal, but I don't think it qualifies as a true signature compared to some of the other signatures that are on property. I just don't understand the points charts there. So if you're looking at bringing in a new resort that would be, we'll call it moderate hybrid for lack of a better term, how do you compete with the boardwalks that have excellent dining right next door? They have excellent dining right on the boardwalk. They have two pools. They have amazing access into the back of Epcot, and you can stay there for 11 points a night in a studio. Where do you then have to place a Riverside to make it comparable to those two? I don't know how the math works, and that's my biggest issue with it.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you on a lot of the Riviera. I actually like Riviera. It does have all the flaws you've mentioned with the points charts are insane. I feel dirty every time I book a room there. It's like I feel like they're literally, I'll use a kind word, they're stealing my money. I actually love Topolino's. I'm going to disagree with you there, but
I think Topolino's is a great meal. I just don't think it's a to die for meal. That's all.
yeah, fair enough, fair enough. But that's, that's the issue I think, and Amy was right on the money with the points charts. And I have no doubt that anything that's a new a freestanding thing, I wouldn't even be shocked if they did build one at a Port Orleans that they did have high point charts. I mean, I could see them trying to push it off. The cabins I think are unique because they are their own little, they're very unique. There's nothing else like them in the DVC repertoire or on Disney property. So I think they went a little cautious with those because they knew that there a lot of the DVC people would probably be a little hesitant to buy there because it does violate a lot of the DVC rules.
I also think that they had to price it where they did on a points chart perspective because you were able to exchange your points to stay at the cabins now, like, before they became DVC. So there was an existing points chart, which is why I think, back to like it being a deluxe resort, because can't you only exchange into deluxe resorts or can you use them at moderates? Can you use DVC points at moderates? I
You
need
have
to.
to exchange to do it. You can't use it. I think you have to like call in and they have to.
You do, but there was an existing points chart for the cabins, and they were like something like 25 or 20 points a night because when you do that, when you exchange DVC points for hotels, it's a terrible exchange
Yeah,
rate.
absolutely.
You're better off renting it's like a cruise. You're better off renting out your points than paying cash.
Yeah. And so they needed to knock it down considerably because they couldn't charge the same points that they would have if you had done like a cash, like an exchange through what's it called? The concierge collection or the whatever collection it is.
But Phil, I think you're completely right that DVC is morphing every, in front of our eyes, and they are looking at it through different lenses to try and see, and it's all from a fiscal viewpoint overall. They're looking at how this thing can be used to offset maybe other trouble areas or fill up a cash account or something, along those lines. But I have no doubt that it will continue to change as things go on. I worry a little bit like you do about what that could mean for people who, like staying at the traditional deluxe resorts. Are they going to get flooded in with people, or, people who buy at moderates and then realize they like the deluxe resorts better? I don't know. I think there's an opportunity for Disney to make everyone happy if they put certain properties on certain resorts and add certain amenities. I think you could kind of have an acceptable situation for people who might have been opposed to a moderate resort if you make it appealing enough and it doesn't take too much. But I think the opportunity is there, but they also have a tremendous opportunity to screw it up, which I wouldn't be shocked if they do. But I think it's possible that they could thread the needle, but I'm not too overly hopeful. If Bill Derrickson lets me handle the expansion of Port Orleans French Quarter like I'm requesting in my emails to him, then I have no doubt that everything will be just fine.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of issues that come in. Like, Scott, one of Scott's biggest pet peeves is the inability to get into something like Midnight Magic or Moonlight Magic, and how many people flood that. You've now got, top of the world and getting in at Bay Lake Tower. There's a lot of member benefits that are already overpopulated. And I think that becomes even more problematic. Now, of course, they could make more events. I'm not saying they couldn't, but there's a logistical issue there. But as someone who owns at Polynesian, my biggest fear is that as you bring in more resorts that many could consider to be not as desirable, those of us that own at those resorts that are desirable are going to have a harder and harder time at the 7-month mark should we want to stay somewhere else, because there's going to be a lot more people wanting to get into those resorts than get out of those resorts. And I think Amy's got Beach Club. Good luck getting a beach club at 7 months. It's just so small, you can't do it. But there are a number of resorts that at 7 months, you've got a reasonable shot at, as long as you're ready to go at 8 a.m. at the 7-month mark. But if you start flooding that market, that's more and more people that are angling for those more desirable properties. And it becomes more and more difficult to score those, which brings us right back to the first piece of advice everyone always gets. Where should I buy with DVC? Buy where you want to stay, because if it goes in this direction, 7 months is going to become a dream.
Absolutely. And that's why I bought a 2024 or 2042 contract when I really had thought I would never do that when I purchased Boardwalk, is because I realized that I don't want to have to be at the mercy of getting on and walk the point walkers and all that. I said I would rather have the ability to get what I want when I want it, and I will take what is arguably a financial hit for it, because I bought at, I think, one of Boardwalk's highs a few years ago. And when you look at the whole buy DVC for the financial math, because it's good, I mean, it was a very poor decision on that aspect, but
Boardwalk
you're right.
specifically has taken a pretty big hit in the last like 6 to
Oh
8
yeah,
months.
I'm way underwater on that contract, but I don't, that's something I don't care about because I'm not going to sell it anytime soon. But it was more important to get in at that 7-month window, because you have all these people now who, and I know people personally who are never DVC people, and they bought into Riviera and stuff, and they didn't think at all about the points charts or anything like that. And they got into it, and now they're looking at it and they're like, oh my God, I can stay here for 3 nights, but if I go to this other place, which is arguably better, I can stay there for 6 nights. So I'm going to try and do that.
So I just want to go back to for the Disney Collection exchange, using Caribbean Beach as the example. Right now, if you were to use your points, you could stay, depending on the time of year, the points range starting at 19 points per night for a standard view at the lowest points, to the highest of 42 if you wanted to stay in a Pirates themed room at Christmas time.
What you could do with 42 points in a true DVC property? It's like 8 weeks in a studio at Old Key West.
The lowest points at a cabin is 34 right now through this exchange. Not if you were to use it as a DVC, using them as like a DVC resort. The DVC point chart for the cabin is significantly lower. And my point is just that if you look at this, like for a standard view, 19 points is the lowest point value. What would they need to lower it to? If you look at the kind of like the percentage that they lowered it for the cabins, for like it being non-DVC to being DVC. I mean, you'd need to be looking at like 6 points per night.
Agreed. That's the only reason that I would move to those properties. And I like those properties. I like them for what they are. We've stayed at them. Emily and I love Port Orleans when we go down to run. It's a fantastic property. I just don't know how you can make the math work. I think this also, 2042 doesn't seem that close, but I think Disney is counting down the minutes until they can get to 2042 and price those properties back up to where everything else is now. Because when you look at what the original point values are on some of those original four, it's outrageous compared to what they could get for them now. I mean, you suddenly have Beach Club and Boardwalk every bit the same amount of points as your monorail resorts.
And and I think just to kind of not to put too fine a point on it, but it really does for the moderate resorts come down to the room size because when you think of Old Key West, those units are really big. And so you are able to use your points to get more nights at that resort than every other resort unless you were to, score a value at Animal Kingdom Lodge or a standard view at Boardwalk, which is probably equal to Old Key West.
Say what you want about the room size. The old Key West studio, I don't know what the square footage is, but based on the shape of the studio, I think there's only like 36 usable square feet outside the bed because it's that weird triangle shape. So there's not a single moderate studio that can be any more annoying than the odd shape of those old Key
Yeah,
West
I
studios.
absolutely hate the old Key West studio. I like the rest of their stuff, but oh my god, I cannot stand them.
Yeah, hard pass.
It is the third largest studio on property. It's 390 square feet.
It doesn't feel that
Riviera
way.
is 423 and Polynesian is 447.
I've stayed at moderate resorts and those rooms feel bigger than that old Key West studio. It's just, those are weird rooms. All right, we are at an hour and 10 minutes, shockingly, so we should probably start wrapping it up.
So let's sum it up with some final thoughts. Shaun,
My final thought is, and I've mentioned it a bunch during the show, is there's room, if done properly, that DVC could theoretically open up some sort of property for sale at a moderate resort that is considered a moderate resort that I would find worth my money to buy there. I think that everyone buys into DVC for different reasons. And if you're strictly on, certain reasons like deluxe properties and stuff, you're probably going to be opposed to some of this. But I think a fair amount of people buy into DVC for the ability to go to Disney more often without having to, because like I said, you're already in the boat. It's not about getting in the boat. You're in the boat. So you feel less of a financial strain in going down on these trips. So I think that there's still going to be people that a moderate resort, it might speak to those people who bought for that. But I personally think there are possibilities that Disney could do moderate resorts, but that is with a fair amount of heavy stipulations. And I wouldn't necessarily be confident that Disney would get to the level that I would feel comfortable at buying at. But I think there's possibilities, and it will be very interesting to see moving forward as Disney starts to, they're going to eventually look for more areas to build and more ways they can introduce a property into an already developed infrastructure area, which a moderate resort would kind of offer them. You already have the roads and the sewage and the water and the buses. It would be an easier way to move in there than finding some hole in the wall in the woods where they'd have to literally build an entire infrastructure out to get it up and running. So I am, optimistic that maybe one day they could have something that meets my goals at one of these resorts, but I'm not holding my breath.
for me, the bottom line is, like I said, I don't care where the resort is. Location at this point for me, because I don't have small kids, is not as big of a factor, but points chart is. And a room being large enough to accommodate me and, 3 or 4 other guests. So, if they could find a way to make those rooms accommodate that number of people comfortably and priced it accordingly to be, kind of competitive to an Old Key West points chart or a Saratoga Springs points chart, I would not be opposed to it because I do think that those resorts are really charming and have a lot of that like 1990s like golden era of Disney, just nostalgia and excellent immersive theming.
I think that Disney has already ventured into the moderate category with DVC with 3 and possibly 4 resorts already, and one of them being the original DVC property. So it's difficult to say that they won't go there because I think they already have. My biggest concern is I just don't know how you can make the points charts work effectively. I will say that with the number of people who like to stay in studios, I do think there would be a demand for a property that just had a glut of studios to throw into the mix. I also think that there are already tiers of DVC resorts. We know which ones are the most desirable, we know which ones are the least desirable, and I think this would just further that gap between the two, making it far more difficult to get somewhere that you didn't own at 7 months. But being a poly owner, especially if slash when that new tower comes online for the same association, it's making me feel better and better about the points I own because we had actually discussed selling our poly points to go elsewhere because it just wasn't fitting our needs anymore with the family growing. But with that new tower coming online, you won't find me anywhere else. So frankly, it's not going to affect me except for all of those new DVC members coming into the fold could make all of those extras, I think, a little less valuable for everybody that's already there. And not just DVC, that includes all the deluxe resorts. Does that wrap it up? I think did we get it all?
I think we got it all. Shaun, I just wanted to thank you again for taking time out of your your busy schedule.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
that's a little bit of a joke because Shaun is recovering from shoulder surgery, so I think he's not quite as busy as he would normally be in
I
his
have been
life.
counting down the minutes today of just watching like Netflix and stuff. Just I told Amy, I said, I'm really excited for tonight's show because it's the most excitement I've had in like 2 weeks. And anytime I can come on and shill my idea for getting balconies at French Quarter so I could look at this Esagula, that is an opportunity I will never let go past.
Well, when I logged on, you already had headphones and a microphone with a filter on it. So that definitely ups the chances of getting back on.
Well, I would gladly come.
A little fun fact is the first time I ever appeared on a podcast, it was as a guest on Shaun and his wife Jennifer's podcast. I think it was like 3 years ago at this point.
Yeah,
So
the now defunct, but yeah, it was it was a good old time back then. So anytime I'll come back on. It's been fun. I enjoy the banter and it will be my pleasure.
All right. Well, also my thanks to Shaun, Amy. Thank you as always, just for being you.
well, my pleasure.
All right, folks. If you like what you heard, we'd simply ask that you run on over to Apple Podcasts, give us a like, 5-star review, help us in the rankings, help bring our shenanigans out to the masses. Amy?
You can also find us on Facebook at DVC Clubhouse. We've got a great group over there that Shaun is a part of with some ridiculous shenanigans that happen. We also are on YouTube at DVC Clubhouse, TikTok, and Instagram. So you can follow us in all of the ways. We appreciate your support. And until next time, we'll DVC you real soon.
Bye bye.
See you guys.
And so our journey comes to an end.
Oh, no, please, can't we go back to page 1 and do it all over again?
Started this thing together, and that's how we'll finish it.
Because that, my friends, is where the magic lives.